Welcome to the Quantum City Initiative, a show about the most important stories, ideas at the intersection of AI, cities, real estate, and the leaders shaping the future of how and where we live and work. Do you save and reinvigorate cities, or are you building new ones?
What is most critical for cities in the future with the sort of AI factory race to work? Episode 25, the QCI show is finally here. We were delayed a week or two, which is a perfect tie-in to what makes a quantum city or a quantum town. Chase, can you rewind back to the 3 feet of snow that we got here in the South Shore of Massachusetts and why our town, and certainly not Boston, can be considered a quantum city because we had no power or internet for a week? Let's talk about that for a second here.
Difficult to pull off the quantum status when you can't keep the basic utilities on. We're a couple of weeks out at this point, and I literally lost heat last night because my generator apparently guzzled over 100 gallons of gas. Just had to get that filled back up, but I got it in time for the show. I can feel the heat kicking on. So yeah, we got some work to do in the Boston metro to get back onto the, I think, quantum trajectory.
So should we even be talking about the future of AI and data centers when a little bit of snow can take down the grid here?
It wasn't a little, but I think it's the majority of sports commentators weren't very good at sports. So maybe that's us. Like, we don't live in the epicenter of a city that's really making progress, I think, on the future, but we like to talk about it.
Love that. All right, well, let's get jumping and started here. Oh, one other quick thing is you've been publishing a lot on LinkedIn, man. You kind of an influencer here now?
I'm publishing a lot. I'm not sure the influence is coming, but
Okay.
You got to start with the first before you get the second.
I like how those are bifurcated.
Yeah.
Activity doesn't necessarily mean outcome.
Yeah, effort and outcomes don't always go together.
That's good. Well, the effort's there. All right, let's jump right in. So the anchor story this week, and it's all over the place. We're going to tie a little bit of late stage SaaS. We're going to tie a little bit of CRE, but the AI disruption really rattled commercial real estate over the last couple of weeks, right? So there were a handful of blog posts talking about Anthropic and Claudebot. We talked a little bit about that in previous shows. In the show notes, we'll link to some of these stories. And historically, when these stories would come out about the efficiencies of AI, the power of AI, the future of software, it was really limited to late stage SaaS and the HubSpots of the world and the Salesforce of the world and so on, and the Monday.coms of the world. However, commercial real estate got hit pretty bad. CBRE tumbled, JLL tumbled, Newmark, Hudson Pacific, BXP. Now, they've all started to recover a little bit because maybe not, it was a little oversold. But let's talk a little bit about that, Chase. Rewind back a couple of weeks, set the stage for us, and then give me your opinion here on should the commercial real estate markets be afraid of what Claude and Anthropic can be doing? Should we have seen that sell-off? Again, it's recovered a little bit, but help me understand this a little.
I think there's a couple of things. The markets are leaning heavily into kind of the news headlines, and it always comes from the people who benefit and build the technologies to talk about this ultra disruption, right? Mm-hmm. They capture their moment in time, and a couple of things can be true at once, right? AI can radically transform work. That can be true. And at the same time, it can be true that we're grossly overestimating how early in the curve we are. It can be true that the Luddite Fallacy applies here, which, the term Luddite Fallacy comes from really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in England, when machines for textile workers were first introduced. There was 40,000 English textile workers that revolted, and with like clubs and things like that, they literally broke the machines. And so they called those people Luddites. And what ended up happening after the next few decades in England was the number of textile workers I think it was like 1820, went from 40,000 to 450,000. So the technology in that case ultimately enabled more throughput. There was significantly more demand for what they produced, and it increased the labor pool because it brought down the cost of what they were selling in a way that it grew the overall market, and it required more labor, not less. I think when it's still really early, but when you listen to what's happening, I think, look, it's a put and a call right now. I think a lot of the big company layoffs are taking advantage of AI when in reality, it is still a little bit of the we got fat and happy during COVID. And
So you're talking like Square, maybe firing over 2,000 people or cutting. Sorry,
Block Square could be
Block
an
Square.
example of that. I think a lot of people during zero interest rates, when everybody was scrambling, hiring talent at astronomical salaries and all of these things, I think those companies got out over their skis. You remember the growth projections. We remember in SaaS, tech was trading 100x top line. I think some of it can be attributed to that. And while people are finding efficiency gains, really where you're finding efficiency gains is in some entry level work. But anybody who spends like really substantial time with these tools, there's still a lot of work. It's not perfect. I don't really believe that everyone is getting monumentally so efficient that we're going to see dramatic headcount cuts quite yet. I tend to be in the camp of more people will be creating software with AI tools rather than less. So in 5 to 10 years, I would expect, I don't know if we'll call them engineers or AI operators or AI orchestrators or whatever.
Managers.
Yep. I suspect we'll have more people working in knowledge work compared to less. And so I think ultimately, I don't think this is going to be as catastrophic as people make out. And that's why you see the commercial real estate firms and all of these people getting sold down. And what I would say is, even if labor becomes, I think it will become much more efficient, but that doesn't decrease demand for it necessarily. It might increase demand for it as we're outlining. I think what we're seeing with the fast velocity of just how quickly AI changes, I think you're going to continue to see, which I think we're going to talk about, the reality of knowledge work becomes that much more important in person because innovation has always clustered. I think digital communication is not the best form for learning. I don't believe that the majority of the workforce outside of kind of those early adopter pioneer types are going to be sitting by themselves, learning how to utilize these tools. In the grand scheme of things, a very small percentage of the world is using AI tools. I actually think with innovation cycles speeding up, what we're going to see is clustering becomes even more important. And so people will need to be together.
Certainly SF comes to mind and the clustering side. I think the thing that scares me the most about all this is there is a chart, and we'll have Justin put it up, about what you just said. The adoption of AI, we know that I think recently Anthropic was the #1 app in the App Store for a bit. But when you talk about really global utilization of these tools, it is very small. Now, what scares me about that is the impact that even that small utilization has on our public markets and our private markets for that matter. And I think that, to me, can be subject just in the rate of change that's happening right now. We've never seen. And that uncertainty, again, we've never seen, which is why late stage SaaS is getting hammered, which is why even though there's the smallest adoption of these artificial intelligence tools, and yes, it's making people more efficient, we don't have any idea whether it's going to create more jobs, whether everybody's going to lose their job. And yet our public markets is just an absolute whipsaw right now. That's what scares me the most about all this. Nobody has any idea. It's a fugazi.
I think one of the things that I won't use the word permanent because I don't believe in it, but I think one of the things that's going to be here for the foreseeable future is volatility.
Yeah.
And I think if you just think about what has structurally happened with technology and a global connected audience on the internet and all of these things, is that timelines have compressed. And so if you just look back in history, the telegraph and everything that kind of came about in the 1800s, they felt like they were in a whipsaw because they had trains transporting newspapers faster than before. They had telegraph messages coming in really quickly.
Yep.
So it's all relative. And anytime there's more information and anytime there is more volatility from that information, there's profit to be made. And so sophisticated actors benefit from volatility. So they have an incentive to play the game that they're suited towards. So I don't think volatility is going to go away. And when there's volatility in the capital markets, then obviously the ramifications go all the way down to labor. So I think volatility is here to stay. And I think the most important thing kind of societally is we saw this, and obviously it was the focus of our first company. But as the internet came about, as the big trends of that time were mobile technologies were changing a lot of industries and business, the internet obviously powered those. The cloud obviously was a disruptive force. I think a lot of the secondary markets outside of Silicon Valley were slow, but they did an okay job of figuring out from an economic development perspective, how do we create kind of the infrastructure for this continual learning of upskilling people in a lot of different ways. There's a big push to get more people to be engineers because the famous Mark Andreessen article, Software is Eating the World. It was going from tech as a vertical industry to software moving horizontally into all these other industries. Obviously, marketing and communication and all of that was dramatically changed. Sales processes and how people bought things were dramatically changed. So we didn't have social media marketers in the 2000s. And then in the 2010s, whole new job that was created. And we're going to be seeing the same thing over the next 5-10 year cycle. So I think it's important for local communities to like quickly pick back up. Like, it's the incubators, it's the accelerator programs, it's partnerships between university and cities to get young people testing, iterating, and failing with new technology. How do you infuse some of those people into these companies so that you're creating a culture of R&D kind of citywide? I think that's super critical.
So on that tangent, before we get to the next story, I just read something, speaking of incubators, that Techstars Boston is taking a hiatus this year. So speaking of QCI and whether or not Boston can handle the snow, we know it can't, but that's a little bit of a stinger to your sort of economic development there. I'll let you respond to that in a second, because Techstars was an incredible program, again, back when we were working on our first company 15 years ago or so. But then on the other side, which I wasn't super aware of, I was just down in Detroit with one of our speakers at Strata, talking about the incredible work that Bedrock is doing specifically around their tech incubation and their economic development. Now we're working on getting them on the show, so I won't spoil that. But I'll let you respond to sort of Boston and sort of the Techstars notion, because to me, that is one of the most critical elements, again, that crossover between tech, artificial intelligence, and CRE, that incubation, those jobs is super important. And it's a real bummer that it feels like Techstars, and maybe it's just a tired brand. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I haven't kept up with the brand of Techstars and where the quality of the program is these days. I did see, I believe his name's David Cohen, who runs the program now, that was originally started out in Colorado by the Foundry Group guys. And he was in the comments on our buddy Scott Kirsner's post about it, saying Techstars Boston is taking a hiatus. I've never heard of an incubator doing that and coming back. And Cohen responded, we're coming back, we're reorienting. Classic Kirsner. He does what he does. But I did see him respond that they're coming back. So hopefully he means that, because that's a good thing. I think with regards to Bedrock, which I think is really interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think a lot of the Bedrock model is the future of commercial real estate. And I
Mm,
think on the what you saw through the 2010s was a lot of different constituencies. You had local government and economic development programs, you had private investors, the VCs, angels, some private equity, you had the entrepreneurs, you had these programs, you had some higher ed involvement, typically late to the party and just piling on rather than bringing a lot of value outside of kind of the select like MITs and like a Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh or
mhm,
whatever. But I think they were starting to put these pieces together, but it was very disorganized. I think there needs to be a scalable, continuous practice of this combination of your real asset in real estate is really only as valuable as the economy sitting on top of it.
mhm,
So I think
mhm,
true operators from an asset management perspective need to be far more proactive in economic development efforts. And I think you see this with a group like Alexandria as well.
mhm,
They are so wildly different than a lot of other REITs and groups where they have maniacal focus on lab life science. They are true partners with companies that end up being their tenants through the life cycle of that company. And while different categories come in and out of favor, I think if you look at durability of a commercial real estate business, like real competency in your category, I think comes from becoming much more deeply ingrained in the success of the businesses in your space rather than what used to be a great, I own the box that everybody needs and I'm going to benefit relatively passively. I think that's a very hard business.
and jokes aside, Detroit, it was lovely this time of year, by the way. Honestly, didn't expect that, but it was vibrant. There were people on the streets. I had never
But
been there.
what was your favorite part?
My favorite part was walking by the new GM headquarters because it's a just insane showroom on the first floor, retail. So it's like all their gorgeous cars, which was cool. And then when you walk when you're in downtown Detroit, which by the way, my geography was terrible because I didn't really know where I was going. It is very close to Toronto, and just a quick hop over from Boston, you can see all the sports stadiums.
That's
So you
cool.
can basically see into where the Tigers play. Little Caesars is right here where the Red Wings and the Pistons play. So for a city that I thought was, I guess, sprawled out and massive, and it is the outskirts of Detroit where all the factories are. That's still pretty far out. But downtown was pretty good. Now, the one thing, missed opportunity before we move on, that I didn't get to, which is a huge bummer, was I didn't get to Mom's Spaghetti, which is
Yeah.
Eminem's restaurant or drive-through or something. But that is on the trip. That's on the agenda for next time.
Next time back.
Okay, let's rewind back a little bit. Let's talk about SF. Let's talk about clustering. Let's talk about you being a LinkedIn influencer, which is fantastic. We've had a lot of people reach out about this. So you
Is there
posted
such a thing
a
as
really,
is there such a thing as a LinkedIn influencer? Or is that
it's
just
called
like
a, yeah, it's called a linkfluencer or a
uh,
linfluencer. No, I don't know. I
okay.
had something going, but no, it didn't work. Yeah, I think so, man. I think there's something there. It's not as
Hmm.
powerful as TikTok. I know you're a big talker, but so let's go back to your story here. So headline caught everybody's attention, caught my attention. Coinbase paid 25 million to leave SF, and now they're coming back with 150,000 square feet, at least 4 years later. Set the table for us, man. What inspired you to write this? Where were you going with this? Big reversion here.
Yeah, I think leaders are leaders for a reason, and I think it's indicative of how other both firms and cities need to watch the just extreme speed and competition and everything that we're seeing in AI. If you go a layer or two down, how are those firms working? And overwhelmingly, the companies that are at the forefront of these things whether they are the AI firms or they're the tech leaders that have the resources to build AI into their products and these things, they are bringing people back. And so it's like how during social, like when we started to get the data that social wasn't great for kids, and like maybe the mobile phones and all these things weren't great for kids, all the people in Silicon Valley had already stopped letting their kids use it. And so that should have been kind of tell that it wasn't great and they knew something that everybody else might not know. And so I think what we're seeing with Coinbase took a big lease. They took a big San Francisco lease a while back, and then they took one in New York, which I think is One Manhattan, which I believe I'll have to fact check, but I think that's an SL Green building, which is
Yeah. Oh, SL Green's One Madison.
yeah, One Madison. And then I don't know if it's the same building or not, but Harvey AI, which is a big kind of legal AI high flyer, they took a big lease in New York as well recently. So these companies are leaning into having very good, high quality space for their talent. So I think that's telling if you're a company thinking about what is important here. Like, obviously, I think that's important. I think it's a little bit of a leading indicator. And typically, like the leading cities have the leading firms. And I think what we're seeing that you can draw again through history in one of my favorite books, Triumph of the City by Edward Glazer. He talked about how over time, if you look at the earnings of top firms, they directly correlate to whether they are at the epicenter physically of their industries. And that's why economic gains and economic productivity are greater in, you think about finance in New York,
Mm-hmm.
right? You think about tech in the Bay Area, all that stuff. I don't think everyone has their favorite outlier of this one company is remote. I think if you got to zoom out to what are the overall GDP trends saying. And I think there's a reason that the AI leading cities are also doing the best from a leasing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I love the complete 180. Years ago it was we're a complete remote first. We're ensuring, quote unquote, that there's no office becomes an official HQ. When they gave up their lease, now obviously that was in 2021. There was more uncertainty maybe than where we are today with the AI movement. But I think it's so critical here. And if you think about all the doom and gloom about AI taking jobs, you have one of the most sophisticated companies, I think, in Coinbase, creating some incredible payment rails behind some of our largest financial institutions, leveraging obviously AI. The push for them to be in person is critical. The other thing that's interesting about this is the neighborhood piece and sort of where they're trying to establish. Obviously, One Madison is an incredible space in New York. I think they have about 1,000 people there. But the reason why they chose to come back to Mission Bay is just all around the neighborhood piece and the cohort of talent that's also in sort of Mission Bay. So I think what's exciting about this is it's not just, to your point, it's not just a city or two. You're going to see maybe more neighborhood creation within other cities. It's not just Palo Alto anymore and so on. You're seeing these neighborhood pop-ups with these like super dense talent centers, which is exciting for SF for sure.
Yeah. And look, I think it's a big talent play, right?
Yeah.
Like talent still mostly will be clustered because we're a social species. And if you're a physical place that has involvement in the community where talent exists, it's less about, hey, are they going to be sitting there from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday tied to the old Henry Ford assembly line hours, and it's more about relevance where the action is happening.
So speaking of where the actions, let's talk about SF for a little bit here. Um, it's been an absolute roller coaster, if you will. Everybody knows SF, everybody knows Silicon Valley. If you wanted to start a company years ago, you needed to do it there. You had to do it there. Famously, we're still in Boston, famously, Paul Graham and Y Combinator and Facebook, and everybody went to SF and you had to go there. And then, of course, COVID hit and you had Salesforce and Zuckerberg and everybody, Coinbase, everybody say SF is completely obliterated. We're remote first, and they're abandoning. Now, SF and California as a whole has a worldwide number of issues with regard to maybe some local government and crime. There are certainly some zombie blocks. There's record sublease. But 2025, you're starting to see this come back. CBRE has published a recent report that obviously SF is sort of leading the charge again. You talked about that a little bit. The vacancy rate still extreme. We were in SF recently. I did see a car. It wasn't a carjacking. I did witness on my way to Starbucks somebody punch a window and just steal stuff. Now I sat there. I didn't know what to do. I'm not going to chase somebody down. I'm not getting in the middle of that. But what is driving SF? Is it this AI boom? Is it that all these companies are finally risen that in person is important? And then why choose San Francisco again from a QCI sort of scorecard lens? What's your take on this city?
I think it's a single horse town. It's gold rush town, and the gold rush is certainly AI. So I think what was it, the 10.2 million square feet leased in 2025, best year since 2019, with AI firms about a quarter of lease space and 80% of newly leased space. So I think anything ancillary to that are the service firms and these things that gravitate towards where the gold rush is. And this is exactly what we saw in Boston when Mass Challenge and Techstars and all those groups started to head into the, I don't know if I'd call it gold, but silver rush in Boston for the new thing, right? There's all sorts of support services and things that the moment in time hype cycle needs. And so I think one of the things that obviously is one of the biggest political issues is that economic dynamism, which again, you think about, you have to build resilience into your local economy and your labor force because change happens so quickly. Economic dynamism is good for the overall survival and adaptation of the local economy, but it certainly puts a ton of stress and strain on, I guess you would call it like urban equilibrium, where you just see the gains get really big at one end and then there's a lot of extreme issues at the other. And despite the arguments from a policy perspective, I think both parties in the United States would claim that we need to fix that. So I think everybody agrees on that. And the problem is that the momentum is like geographically concentrated, it's sector concentrated, and it's capital concentrated. And I don't think we, from whether it's governance or market forces or whatever, have figured out how to smooth it out a little bit so that we can have the benefits of extreme innovation, which are critical, obviously, to national security and all that stuff. But also, like, how do you keep the middle intact, right? Because I think the middle tends to get overlooked.
I'm just not sold on SF coming back as a whole.
Just with numbers.
I know. But I will say it was inspiring to be out there. It's inspiring to be in New York. It's inspiring to be in London, even though they got a whole nother set of issues. What's not inspiring is Boston. Boston feels, walking around downtown yesterday, although walking around downtown yesterday was completely empty. There was nobody at lunch. I mean, yeah, the weather stinks here, but I will say I was at the SVB office, and for our Boston homers, they would know that the Silicon Valley Bank office in Boston used to be a really incredible gathering spot. And this is, 15, 20 years ago. After walking into the building at 53 State Street Exchange Center, there was a little bit of activity in the lobby. But once I got to one of their floors, it was vibrant. People everywhere. They had guests everywhere. So and the reason why I'm bringing this up, and people might not be like, hey, why are you talking about SVB? I came to it from the SF angle, Silicon Valley Bank, but that did inspire me a little bit. I didn't ask if all the companies here were AI companies or sort of where they were looking to do business with them, but the trends are there. They're good. And I think the important thing, which you mentioned earlier, is the sort of economic growth, the job creation, the Techstars moment here, where the tech community, the AI community, the startup, the innovation community is so critical for a city. It's so insanely critical for a city. And just seeing that little bit in Silicon Valley Bank yesterday was really good in their office here in Boston. Obviously, the story here in SF and what these companies coming back is important. So maybe I am sold. I don't know.
All right. Well, I'm glad you talked yourself into it.
I did. And I had to remember just the office yesterday, was really good. All right, that's good. Couple quick hits here, which we'll get to. So Placer.ai came out with a study. I mean, this isn't super groundbreaking. Tuesday and Wednesday are the new Monday. We know, we've seen it in our data that the highest occupancy days are sort of midweek. But what does that mean? What does that mean for Mondays? What does that mean for Fridays, Chase? Like, if this is true, if this is real, and we know that banks are demanding people come back 5 days a week as an office, we're in 4 days a week. But if it's true that you're going to take a lease, which is what? Access to inventory 24/7, 7 days a week. That's effectively what the lease is. And you're only going to use it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And that's what this data is trying to tell us. What does that mean for traditional leases?
I think the number one, what we're seeing in our data is, again, leaders lead. So finance is back. There's the, I always mix it up, but it's 996 or something that the leading tech Silicon Valley companies follow, which is you work 9 to 9, 6 days a week or something like that. And there's been a bunch of studies that have come out which suggest that AI doesn't lower your workload. It makes work more intense. So I don't know what that means, but I do think competition's going to heat up with more efficiency. I don't think we're all just going to be like hitting a button, set it and forget it. I don't see that playing out. And I think when the leading firms are doing something, Coinbase bringing people back, finance being back in the office, I think it's a slow boil that the market tends to gravitate because capital gravitates to those companies, and then everybody else follows suit more slowly. So I think we're going to continue to see it tick up and up, particularly as the winners and losers and the gap between firms continues to widen. I don't think, to your question about the lease, I don't think it's going to gravitate back towards, hey, we're just going to go back to the old ways. We're seeing this concretely, which is you might still have long-term leases, but there's going to be a lot more gives in those leases. I wrote about.
What do you mean by that? Yeah, what do you mean by that?
So the demand side is going to be demanding. You can't demand everything, but you can demand certain things. So you're either going to be demanding more flexibility, which is the last thing that the industry wants to trade on because the capital likes the long-term commitment. But you do see flex operators seeing some benefit in the market that we're in. And then when you do get somebody who's, look, I'll do 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the number, they're getting a ton of concessions, whether it's guaranteed daycare. They have, if it's a new build, they have substantially more say and influence in it, which isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. I think it's just happening faster. They're just getting a ton of free rent up front. And for people who don't know the industry, it's very hell-bent on getting headline base rent number and making that what I would describe as artificially high. Because, if you get a 20-year lease and you give 2-3 years free, I'm making up the numbers some extreme, but if you get 2 to 3 years free and the average rental rate for, say, the last 17 years is $100, it's not really when you average it across all 20 years, but they trade off of what the rent will be, assuming that whoever buys the building next is going to say, cool, I can depend on those cash flows. And so if you have early termination or certain rights about expansion or downsizing, which are, I think, becoming common, you can't really underwrite that cash flow based off of the headline numbers easily. So I think there's going to be continued pressure on the industry to prove particularly when you're going to sell an asset, that this tenant is going to be good for the lease economics beyond just what I can read in the lease, right?
And what's interesting about that, and the way it works today, in order to prove that we're sound for the lease economics, they look at what? Our balance sheet, our income statement. That's it. So that
It's
feels
an
back.
it's an industry built on contractual lock-in, not customer success.
I won't go to where I want to go in this and to completely talk our book. So I'm not going to go there today as to why that's completely backwards. But that's good. Okay, another quick hit. Let's talk about SpaceX for a second in the financial markets. It's poised to raise more money in its IPO this year than was raised in last year's 90 IPOs combined. Why is that important? It's just Elon Musk securing the bag.
Yeah. He kind of already had the bag and now he's getting a much bigger bag. I think it's important because I think with all of the craziness that we're seeing in the world, and these things always culminate at the same time, right? You have like advancement in a small portion of the population, technology development and things like that. And then geopolitically, international tensions rise. If anybody really wants to bum themselves out, they can read Ray Dalio's books about the end of empires and how all that goes down.
Which is also why, and we were talking about this yesterday. You were talking about the recent interview with Ray on all it. I was going to put that in the car in the commute the other day, but I'm like, I just don't want to be bummed out this morning. I just don't want to be bummed out. So
by the way, he's not saying anything new. It's the same stuff from his last book, which is very good. I encourage it. He's a very smart guy. The reason it bums me out is because I think he might be right.
I know.
But I think it's when you think about the founding of America, the first people who came over here, as you and I just lived through a brutal snowstorm. We have all of the modern technology in the world. I was like, I can't believe there is a population of people so desperate to get out of their current situation that they would weather this type of storm without a generator and all of the, I'm so soft. I'm sitting there being like, oh, this is terrible. And they just were like in wood houses, cooking fires.
Yep. We're a soft generation, man.
So I think we're getting into, and everybody, it's funny, you go the last 3 decades, not a ton of people talk about it, but certain people talk about how we've basically discovered everything in the world. And that's just such a naive view when you look up at the stars. So I think it's like we are getting to a place where there's going to be probably in our lifetime somebody living on Mars. And somebody did a great breakdown of how everyone thinks that Elon is kind of chaotically got all these different companies. And somebody did a breakdown of, all right, well, if you think about it, what if you say the mission is to live on Mars, right? Then what's the first thing you need? You need the rocket to get there. And obviously they're just like making complete fools of anybody else competing with them. They're so far ahead of everybody else in the world. So they're dramatically proving out kind of step number 1. Step number 2 is when you get up there, how are you going to survive? And he has something called the Boring Company, which builds tunnels. And you're going to need to create in that atmosphere and environment, you're going to need to create living spaces and stuff like that underneath the surface. Okay, he's got this company called the Boring Company, which is creating tunnels. And then it's, how are you going to power the place? He's all about solar because transporting oil and all that stuff is going to be very difficult. How are you going to communicate back to Earth? AI, which now owns X, which was Twitter. And what powers all of it? You need to do it efficiently, artificial intelligence, right? I think it's pretty easy to guess what he's trying to do because he also just says it. Like, I want to colonize Mars. He wears a shirt with it. And very few people can both do the technology and the capital markets piece of it and are as dogged about not caring what anybody says. So we're living through one of the most interesting times, if not the most interesting time in humanity.
I think what's most exciting for me and all the cash he's going to raise is, yeah, it would be great to, no, actually, I don't want to live on Mars at all, but it's good for the people that
Not
maybe
going to be
do.
fun for the first people. It's going to.
No, like, I just, I'm excited to see what Elon Musk has always been an in-office guy. He's always built and he's continuing to build factories and create jobs. And when you think about economic development for cities, what he's doing with Austin and where he puts his gigafactories and all of that, he's always been a sleep on the factory line floor guy. What I'm most excited about, the whatever ungodly amount of money it ends up finally being in the capital raise when they go public, is where he's going to deploy that, and specifically what cities, and where does he expand? Where does he expand his reach just here in the States and globally? Sure, expand his reach on I almost swore on the moon and Mars. But I'm excited to see where he continues to build and what cities he invests in, because he really is a city maker.
Yeah, Stargate and what they're building down in Texas. I think you can follow the business policy and environment of different places and predict where he is. He's already there, but I think Texas is going to be a huge beneficiary.
And what's super exciting about this, and the joke here writes itself, and we're up on the show, and then I have one more question for you, but the one more bit of news joke here is Twitter stock now the most valuable, or will Twitter stock be the most valuable stock that was once in folks' stock options or ISOs or portfolio when SpaceX goes public? And that is.
Well, I did think it was funny that everybody who is an Elon hater was hating on the P&L and the issues they were running into. And I was like, oh, man. Like, if you want to disagree with the guy and all that stuff, more power to you. But the dumbest take was like, he's going to screw up Twitter. Like, you didn't think he was going to figure by any means necessary. You didn't think he was going to find a return for the people who backed him on that, which were a bunch of the banks, a bunch of the critical VCs, Sequoia, the Increasons. You can dislike the guy and have the intellectual honesty to be like, he's probably going to make a bunch of money on this somehow, some way, which clearly I think everybody who is in that deal is probably doing just fine.
Last bit of news this week, and what was really inspired me, I was listening to one of the All In podcasts, and Jason Calacanis was talking about some of the agentic work that he's doing as a CEO of his own business, some of the prompts and some of the agentic work. So my question for you to wrap up today's show, because I know that you talk to Claude, I know you talk to ChatGPT, I know you talk to Grok a lot, but we haven't had a show in a couple of weeks. And when we have guests on, we talk about some of their most recent prompts, their favorite prompts. And I think one of the most interesting ones that we heard from one of our guests was, because all of these tools plug into Gmail and their CRMs, as a CEO, what am I missing? Like, what am I not seeing? So I'm curious for you, man. Wrap up the show. In the past couple of weeks since we had a show, or even just this week, have you had any aha moments recently in using any of the tools? Has it been Cowork? Has it been a Claude bot? Has it been working with our engineering teams? What's exciting?
I don't think I've had any recent ahas other than as I get into not just using the chat app, but more of the true agent functionality. I'm seeing significantly more where the technology is very powerful. It's still very imperfect. And there's going to be a whole ecosystem built around it, training people, teaching people how to make it. And the whole thing of it just working, like, it doesn't, like, even if you're not technical, you're going to need to understand how technology works to the point of connectors break and like, how does it access certain data? Like, everyone basically is going to need to be trained on data, right? And understanding what it's only as good as the input, and it's been trained. A lot of these models have been trained on obviously the open web. The open web is the totality of anything people have put on it, and people are flawed. They all write, it can make mistakes. Like, sure does. Makes them fast, though. And so every mistakes are going to speed up, progress is going to speed up. And I think the best use I get out of it is I make it challenge me on any of my ideas. So I'm like, tell me why this is bad. Tell me why this is dumb. Me where I'm wrong. Where could this fail? So I find it most useful on that front.
And we'll end on an Office Space joke,
Cheers.
right?
Cheers.
What is mine? That's a great question. My joke, because you disrupted it, my flow was that I have as much as 4 agents currently working for me right now.
Good office bit. Good one.
I think the most exciting thing for me, so one like super concrete example, just like absolutely in the weeds, was just working with a handful of folks on our team on a path to expansion. So, okay, let's take a current book of business. So, I would go in and prompt Claude Cowork and say, okay, listen, here's who I am. I'm an account manager at HQO, and I load up the current book of business that we have, right? So call it 20 logos across, I don't know, 60 or so buildings. I plug in our sales deck. So reference this sales deck, reference this methodology. Then I say, reference this commission plan, reference here's what it is. Here's who I am at the company. Here's how I make money. Here's my current book of business. Here's my goals. Here's my targets. Now build a 3-year expansion plan for me based on the news, based on the current health of the account, based on the status of the account, what it spit back to me. And it's certainly not perfect. Like you said, it can make mistakes, but it was mind blowing at just a level of detail. And it went back in time into the CRM to identify opportunities that we hadn't seen in a while. And so like, to me, that was super exciting in that, we could have just sat in a room for 3 hours reminiscing about this account and going through that. And it did it all in about 2 minutes. And it built a 3-year expansion plan. Now, of course, the devil's in the details and we got to go execute on it. But it was just, going back in our own data set, to me, was that unlock this week. And then it interprets the tone of some of the emails and gives you candid feedback on how you might have screwed something up, and how you screwed a pitch up. And like, you were over here, did you try this? So to your point about beating up ideas, to me, that was a big unlock for me. And so now as I think about working on any of our big accounts and going into any meeting, it's not just, tell me about this person and what have they been doing lately and what is the news lately. Tell me about the last 15 interactions I had with them, or the last 15 interactions I had with that company, and what did I screw up? Where did I go wrong? What did I miss? That was a good one.
I think your point about the feedback, I think one of the things that might have a profound impact on is development. Development's so hard because of people
like personal. You're not talking about tech development. You're talking like personal development, right?
Personal. Yeah. It's so hard. Humans and the emotion between things being personal. AI, people are already probably too comfortable sharing with it. But I think for the practice of self-development, I think people are just going to be more comfortable with it. And it can give, particularly if you ask, I think Grok is the best at just giving brutally honest feedback in an Elon style manner. And I think for managers, it's going to be a huge unlock for people who struggle with that, to leverage AI to make it less personal for people and be like, look, the machine is saying, which I don't think is the right way to do it, but I do think there will be more that it has the opportunity to bring candor into things at a much higher frequency, which I think.
Yeah. And it wasn't just, hey, Greg, your pitch stinks. Or it wasn't, because sometimes managers have done with that. It was, here's a missed opportunity based on X, Y, and Z. So it like did an incredible job, not just being like, hey, listen, you got to work on your pitch. You got to do some pitch practice. Let's do some role play. Fine. Okay. It was specifically, let's take a look at this interaction. Let's take a look at what was happening, how they currently use the product. You approach this. Here was a missed opportunity. Now, again, you got to take everything with a grain of salt a little bit, but it really opened up. So when you think about that feedback loop, it gave a really good concrete example that I think immediately opens people up to, hey, okay, you're right, because we're just looking at facts here. And again, it was brutally honest about a handful of accounts that I thought was fascinating. And as it is now, and we've already used it this week to open up, and we've used the feedback that we had a handful of customers that maybe weren't super responsive to us. How dare I say that? We already have meetings already lined up in the next couple of weeks, just based on some of these tweaks to the feedback and the language. So it was really interesting. It was good.
Yeah.
I was good about that.
Yeah.
All right, that's an hour. That's an hour, folks. Fastest growing commercial real estate, tech, AI podcast on the planet. Probably the only one, but it is the fastest growing, that is. We'll be back next week. We've got a lot more guests coming up. Super excited about this one. Thanks for coming out.